The first thing I saw was my own front door closing. I was still sitting in my truck at the end of the dirt driveway when it happened. The late afternoon sun was behind the house, turning the windows into dark mirrors. I had a clear view of the porch, and I watched the door slowly swing inward, as if someone inside had just stepped back and pulled it shut. I live alone. My name is Richard Hale. I'm 68 years old, retired from 35 years of hauling freight across 3 states. After my wife passed in 2019, I sold the house in Tulsa and bought 80 acres in eastern Oklahoma. No neighbors within sight, just pasture, a pond, and a narrow dirt road that turns to mud whenever it rains. Isolation was the point. I liked the quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. That afternoon I had driven into town for feed and diesel. I was gone maybe an hour. I remember because I caught the 3 p.m. farm report on the radio during the drive back. Nothing unusual, nothing strange, until I saw the door move. I didn't jump out right away. I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel watching the house. The porch light wasn't on. No truck in the yard. No movement in the windows. The wind wasn't strong enough to move that door. It sticks on the frame. You have to pull it hard and lift slightly for it to latch. I know because I installed it myself. After a full minute of staring, I told myself what any reasonable man would. You left it open. You're getting older. You forgot. That explanation felt thin, but I grabbed the feed bags from the truck anyway and walked toward the house. The air felt wrong before I reached the porch. Still, heavy. Like the air before a storm, except the sky was clear. The door was fully closed when I stepped up to it. Latched, not just resting against the frame. I stood there listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. No television. I opened it slowly. The living room looked the same as when I'd left. Recliner by the window. My wife's old quilt folded over the back. Coffee table clear. But something in the room felt displaced. Took me a moment to notice it. My hallway mirror was angled differently. Just slightly. Enough that instead of reflecting the back wall, it reflected the front door. As if someone had turned it to watch the entrance. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. I called out once. Hello. The word sounded strange in my own house. Too loud. No answer. I walked through each room, slow and deliberate. Kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, spare room I use for storage. Everything looked untouched. Until I opened the refrigerator. The light came on. And sitting on the middle shelf was a jar of pickles. I don't eat pickles. Never have. My wife did, but she'd been gone 4 years. I stood there staring at that jar like it might explain itself. The seal had been broken. The lid was slightly twisted, not tight. I closed the fridge without touching it. Maybe it had been there a long time. Maybe I'd forgotten. That's what I kept telling myself. I carried the feed out to the barn before letting the thoughts spiral. Work first, panic later. But as I stepped back into the yard, I noticed something else. My barn door was open. Not wide, just a few inches. Enough to show darkness inside. I distinctly remember shutting it that morning. There's a hook latch I use every time because raccoons get in otherwise. The hook was hanging loose. I walked toward it slowly, listening. The barn smells like hay and oil and old wood. That day there was something else. Sweat. Not fresh but recent. I stepped inside. The light switch didn't work immediately. It flickered once before turning on. Everything looked normal. Tools in place. Tractor parked. Feed bins sealed. Then I saw the ladder. I keep a tall ladder leaning flat against the wall. Now it was standing upright in the center of the barn. Directly beneath the loft. I felt something cold move through my chest. I hadn't been up to the loft in months. There's nothing up there but old boxes and insulation. I stood at the base of the ladder and looked up. The loft opening was a square of black. No sound. No movement. I climbed halfway up before I realized how stupid that was. If someone was up there, I'd be presenting myself like an offering. I climbed back down. Instead, I stepped outside and circled the barn. On the far side, in the soft dirt near the fence line, I found footprints. Boot prints. Large. Heavy tread. Not mine. They didn't approach from the road. They came from the tree line behind the property. And they didn't leave. They circled the barn once. Then stopped near the back door. No returning trail. No exit. As if whoever made them had decided to stay. I went back inside the house and locked every door. Then I sat in my recliner with my old .38 revolver on the armrest and waited for night. I didn't call the sheriff right away. In rural counties, deputies take time to arrive. And what would I say? Someone moved my ladder? There's a jar of pickles in my fridge? I told myself I was overreacting. The sun went down around 8:15. The kind of darkness you only get far from city lights settled over the land. I turned off all the interior lights except the one in the kitchen. And that's when I heard it. A knock. Not on the front door. On the back. 3 slow taps. I froze. Then 3 more. Not frantic. Not aggressive. Patient. I didn't answer. The tapping stopped. For a full minute, there was nothing. Then I heard the back door handle turn. Once. Twice. Testing it. The deadbolt held. I stood slowly, revolver in hand, and walked toward the hallway. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Halfway down the hall, I heard something that made my legs feel weak. A voice. Low. Close to the door. Richard. I stopped breathing. I have never introduced myself to anyone out here. The nearest property owner lives over a mile away. I didn't respond. The voice came again. You left the barn open. Not loud. Not threatening. Almost conversational. I stepped closer, positioning myself beside the wall instead of directly in front of the door. How do you know my name? I called out. Silence. Then a soft chuckle. You've been here a long time. The way he said it made my skin tighten, like he'd been watching that entire time. I made the decision then to call the sheriff. I backed into the living room and dialed. While I was on the phone, the back porch boards creaked. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Moving away from the door. The dispatcher told me a deputy was en route. 20 minutes, maybe 30. Out here, that's fast. I stayed on the line until headlights swept across the front windows. The deputy searched the property thoroughly. Barn. Loft. Tree line. Field. Nothing. No fresh footprints beyond the ones I'd seen. No sign of forced entry. No vehicle tracks on the dirt road. He asked if I'd had any disputes with anyone. I haven't. I live quietly. I mind my business. He suggested maybe a transient had wandered through. Maybe someone looking for scrap metal. He didn't believe someone knew my name. I could see it in his expression. Before leaving, he advised motion lights and trail cameras. The next morning, I drove into town and bought both. I installed cameras facing the barn, the driveway, and the back door. Motion lights along the fence. For 2 nights, nothing happened. No movement. No alerts. I started to think maybe it was a one-time incident. Until the 3rd night. Around 2:17 a.m. My phone buzzed. Motion detected. Barn. I opened the live feed. The image was grainy in night vision. The barn door was closed, but someone was standing in front of it, facing the camera, too far for clear detail. Tall. Still. I watched for nearly 30 seconds. He didn't move, didn't approach, didn't turn away, just stood there, as if waiting for me to come outside. Then the screen glitched. For a brief second, static filled the image. When it cleared, he was gone. No running, no walking away, just gone. The next morning, I checked the footage. The file was corrupted. Every other camera recorded fine. Only the barn clip was damaged. I walked out there at dawn. The ladder was upright again. I never put it back that way. This time, I didn't climb it. I stood beneath the loft and listened. And I heard breathing. Not loud. Not exaggerated. Just steady, human breathing above me. I backed away slowly. Walked out of the barn. Locked it from the outside. And for the first time since moving here, I packed a bag. I didn't stay that night. I drove to a motel 20 miles away. The following day, I returned with the deputy. We opened the barn together. The loft was empty. No bedding. No food wrappers. No sign anyone had stayed. But in the dust up there we found something. Words. Written with a finger. "You left me alone." The deputy photographed it. Filed a report. No suspects. No further evidence. I installed more cameras after that. Inside the house this time. Hallway. Kitchen. Living room. For a week, nothing happened. Until I reviewed footage one afternoon and saw something that still keeps me awake. At 1:43 a.m., the hallway camera activated. The recording showed my bedroom door slowly opening. I sleep with it closed. It opened halfway, stopped, then closed again. I was asleep the entire time. I know because the next clip shows me walking to the bathroom at 3:12 a.m. Unaware. No one visible in the frame. No shadow. Just the door. Moving. The sheriff's office eventually suggested I consider selling. They said maybe someone had taken an interest in the property. Hunters. Squatters. But no one could explain how someone entered without triggering cameras. Or how they knew my name. Last month I received a letter. No postage. Just tucked under my mailbox flag. Inside was a photograph. Taken from the tree line. My house in the frame. Me standing on the porch. Date stamped from 2 years ago. Before any of this started. On the back written neatly, "You shouldn't have come here alone. I'm still living here. For now." The cameras still run. The barn door stays locked. But sometimes late at night the motion light turns on. And when I check the feed, there's nothing there. Except the ladder. Standing upright. Waiting. I didn't see the house at first. I saw the smoke. A thin gray line rising above the trees across the ravine. Steady and controlled. Not drifting the way wildfire smoke does. It was the kind of smoke you get from a wood stove in cold weather. The problem was no one lived across that ravine. I would know. My name is Elaine Mercer. I'm 72 years old, and for the past 11 years I've lived alone in northern Montana, about 20 miles outside the nearest town. My husband and I bought the cabin when we retired. After he passed, I stayed. People always ask if I get lonely. Lonely is different from isolated. Lonely feels empty. Isolated feels quiet. I prefer quiet. The nearest neighbor is 3 miles down the road. Between my cabin and the next property is forest, then a steep ravine, then another stretch of trees that leads to state land. No utilities run out there except the single power line to my place. No water access except a seasonal creek. No houses. That's why the smoke bothered me. It was late October when I first saw it. The air had that metallic bite that comes before snow. I was standing on my back porch with a cup of coffee when I noticed the line rising above the treetops. Not thick. Not panicked. Deliberate. I watched it for 5 full minutes. It didn't move. It didn't thin. It stayed steady. I told myself it could be a controlled burn on state land. Maybe forestry management. But they notify residents when they do that. And I hadn't received anything. That afternoon, I drove the ATV halfway toward the ravine. There's no trail all the way across, but there's a clearing where you can see through the trees if you stand on a fallen log. I did, and I saw it clearly. Not wildfire, not forestry, chimney smoke, rising from somewhere below the tree line, somewhere hidden. I felt something shift in my chest. The land across the ravine doesn't have structures. I've hiked it before. Years ago, my husband and I explored nearly every acre out here. There's no cabin. Or at least there wasn't. I didn't cross that day. The slope down into the ravine is steep and unstable, and at my age, you don't take unnecessary risks alone. Instead, I went home and called the county office. They told me there were no registered structures in that section. No new permits. No active leases. It was state land. I slept poorly that night. Every time the wind moved through the trees, I pictured someone tending a fire across from me, watching the glow from my cabin the same way I'd watched theirs. The next morning, the smoke was gone. Clear sky. No sign of activity. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Until 3 days later when it returned. Same place. Same steady column. That time I brought binoculars. I stood on the porch and focused on the tree line across the ravine. Took a moment to find it. The chimney was low, nearly flush with the slope, camouflaged by branches. Whoever built it had done so deliberately, hidden from casual view, but not from someone who knew where to look. I watched for nearly 20 minutes. No movement, no figure, just smoke. I considered calling the sheriff, but what would I say? There's smoke on state land? They'd tell me to ignore it. So I decided to do something I hadn't done alone in years. I crossed. Took longer than I remembered. The ravine floor was muddy, and climbing the other side left me winded. I stopped twice to catch my breath. When I reached the ridge across from my property, I moved carefully, listening. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Even birds keep a certain distance from human activity. I followed the faint smell of wood smoke until I saw it. Not a cabin. Not a tent. Something in between. A structure built low into the hillside, almost dug into it. Logs stacked horizontally, covered in dirt and brush for insulation. The chimney pipe barely visible above. It wasn't temporary. It was constructed. Intentional. I approached slowly. There were no footprints in the immediate area, but the ground was covered in pine needles, which don't hold impressions well. The door was a simple wooden slab. Closed. No lock visible. I stood there longer than I care to admit. Then I knocked. Once. No answer. I knocked again. Nothing. I should have left. Instead, I pushed the door open. Inside, it was warmer than outside. Not hot, but recently heated. A small wood stove sat in the corner, still glowing faintly. Someone had been there recently. Very recently. There was a cot against the far wall. A metal bucket. A shelf with canned goods. A lantern. No photographs. No personal items. Nothing that identified the occupant. Just enough to live. I stepped back out and closed the door. I didn't explore further. The feeling in my stomach wasn't curiosity. It was awareness. Whoever built that structure chose that exact location. From that ridge, you can see my cabin clearly through the trees. The angle is perfect. Close enough to observe. Far enough to remain hidden. I didn't hike home slowly. I moved faster than I should have. Back across the ravine. Up the slope. Into my yard. When I reached my porch, I turned around. The smoke had stopped. That night, I left my lights off. I sat in the dark living room with the curtains slightly parted and watched the tree line. Around 9:40 p.m. I saw a faint flicker. Not bright, but there. A small, controlled flame inside the hillside. I watched it until my eyes hurt. Then something else caught my attention. Movement. On my side of the ravine. Near the tree line behind my cabin. I held my breath. A shadow moved between trunks. Slow. Not animal-like. Too steady. Too upright. It disappeared before I could focus clearly. I told myself it was paranoia. I locked every door anyway. The next morning, I found something near my back steps. A single pine cone. Split cleanly in half. Placed upright. It wasn't there the day before. It wasn't something that could have fallen naturally like that. It was arranged. Facing the house. I didn't touch it. Instead, I walked to the edge of my property and scanned the tree line. No smoke. No visible movement. But the forest felt occupied. The next week passed quietly. No smoke. No pine cones. No shadows. I began to think perhaps the occupant had moved on. Until I received a knock. Not at night. Not in the dark. At 2:15 p.m. On a Tuesday. 3 slow raps on the front door. I didn't answer immediately. Through the window, I saw a man standing on the porch. Mid-50s, perhaps. Beard. Dark jacket. Neutral expression. He didn't look like a drifter. He didn't look lost. He looked like he belonged there. I opened the door halfway. Yes. He smiled politely. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm doing some survey work in the area. His voice was calm. Even. I've been staying on state land across the ravine. I wanted to introduce myself in case I'm making too much smoke. There it was. Open acknowledgement. My heart pounded harder than I expected. You built that structure? I asked. He nodded slightly. Temporary shelter. Temporary. It looked anything but. Do you have permission? I asked. He held my gaze. I haven't caused any harm. That wasn't the question. I prefer to know who's near my property, I said. He tilted his head. I've been here for some time. The way he said it made my skin prickle. How long? I asked. A few months. Months. I'd only noticed the smoke recently, which meant he'd been there before I knew. You watch my cabin from up there, I said. He didn't deny it. I like knowing my surroundings, he replied. The phrasing was careful, neutral, not threatening, but not reassuring. You live alone, he added. It wasn't a question. My grip tightened on the door frame. Yes, he nodded slowly. I thought so. That was the moment something inside me shifted from caution to fear. Not loud fear, not panic, just a steady realization. He had been observing, long enough to know my routine, long enough to confirm I was alone. You should have introduced yourself sooner, I said. He smiled faintly. I didn't want to alarm you. The irony was almost unbearable. He stepped back slightly from the porch. I'll try to keep the smoke minimal. Then he turned and walked down the steps. Not toward the road, toward the trees behind my house, toward the ravine. I watched him until he disappeared. I didn't call the sheriff that day. I don't know why. Maybe because he hadn't technically done anything illegal I could prove. Maybe because I didn't want to escalate something that was still contained by distance. That night, I closed every curtain. For the first time in 11 years, I felt truly watched. Around midnight, I woke to a sound. Not knocking, not footsteps, breathing. Close, too close. I opened my eyes. The bedroom was dark. The sound continued. Slow, measured. I didn't move. Then I realized it wasn't inside the room. It was outside the window. The bedroom window faces the side yard. No porch. No reason for anyone to stand there. The breathing continued for several seconds, then stopped. I lay there for what felt like an hour before finally sitting up and turning on the lamp. The yard was empty, but in the dirt below the window there were footprints. Fresh, leading from the tree line to the wall. And back. He hadn't knocked. He hadn't tried the door. He had simply stood there, listening. The next morning, I drove into town and filed a report. The deputy visited the ridge across the ravine. The structure was gone. Not dismantled. Gone. No logs. No stove. No sign it had ever existed. As if the hillside had swallowed it. The deputy looked at me carefully when I described it. He suggested I might have mistaken a hunting blind for something more permanent. But I know what I saw, and I know the warmth of a recently used stove. The smoke hasn't returned. It's been 3 weeks. But sometimes, in the early morning light, I catch myself scanning the tree line automatically. And sometimes, when I step onto the porch, I feel as though I'm stepping into someone else's line of sight. The ravine looks the same. The forest looks unchanged. But isolation feels different now. Not empty. Not quiet. Occupied. And the worst part isn't that he built something across from me. It's that he tore it down so easily. Which means he never intended to stay in one place. It means the only fixed location in that equation is me. I saw the truck before I saw the man. It was parked at the far edge of my property, just beyond the cattle gate that hasn't been used in years. Old model Ford. Faded blue. No plates on the front. The back plate was too dirty to read from where I stood. It wasn't there the night before. Out here in West Texas, you notice vehicles. There are no casual wrong turns. No tourists. No reason to be on my land unless you intend to be. My name is Daniel Cross. I'm 74 years old. I've lived on this ranch since 1981. My wife passed 8 years ago. My son moved to Houston and calls twice a month. I don't mind the quiet. I mind the unexpected. The truck was positioned facing outward, as if ready to leave. Engine off. No dust cloud in the distance. No sign of recent movement. I grabbed my binoculars from the porch and focused. The driver's seat was empty, but the passenger door was slightly open. Just a crack. The wind was calm. I set the binoculars down and stood there longer than I should have, debating. Calling the sheriff out here takes time. And unless someone is actively threatening you, they treat it as trespassing at worst. So I did what I've always done. I walked, slowly. The dirt under my boots felt louder than usual. When I was about 50 yards out, I noticed something else. The gate was open, not broken, unlatched. I know I closed it yesterday after checking the fencing. I reached the truck and circled it once before peering inside. The keys were still in the ignition. That made my chest tighten. No one leaves keys in a vehicle unless they plan to return quickly. Or unless they want you to think they will. I checked the bed of the truck. Empty except for a coiled rope and a metal toolbox. Locked. I stepped back and scanned the horizon. Flat land stretches for miles out here. You can see a man walking from half a mile away. But I saw no one. Just heat waves rising from the ground. I didn't search further. I walked back to the house and called the sheriff. 2 hours later, a deputy arrived. He ran the plate. Reported stolen 3 days ago from a town 70 miles south. No sign of forced entry. No fingerprints visible. They towed it away. The deputy asked if I'd noticed anyone unusual recently. I told him no. That was true. At least until that evening. Around dusk, as the sky shifted from orange to purple, I noticed movement near the old windmill on the north side of the property. It's been broken for years. Just a rusted silhouette against the sky. The movement was slight, like someone stepping from behind it and back again. I squinted. Nothing. Then again. A shadow where there shouldn't be one. Too tall to be a coyote. Too upright to be livestock. I went inside and turned off the lights. Out here, if your house is lit and the land is dark, you become a stage. I prefer not to perform. From the kitchen window, I watched the windmill. No further movement. I told myself it could have been heat distortion. Your eyes play tricks in open country. But I locked every door anyway. At 10:13 p.m. I heard it. A knock. Not on the front door. On the side of the house. 3 solid hits against the wood siding. I froze mid-step. No one knocks on siding. If you want someone's attention, you use the door. The sound came again. Closer to the back. Like someone walking along the exterior wall, testing. I picked up the shotgun from its place near the pantry. I didn't announce myself. I waited. The knocking stopped. Then came something worse. A dragging sound. Slow. Along the outside wall. Metal against wood. It traveled from the back corner of the house toward the front. I followed it from inside, moving parallel along the hallway. The sound stopped near the living room window. Silence. I stepped carefully toward the window and peered through the curtain. Nothing. But on the ground beneath the siding, I saw a faint scrape line in the dust, as if someone had dragged something long and narrow along the house. The next morning, I found what it was. A metal rod, about 3 feet long, left leaning against the porch post. Not mine. I called the sheriff again. He searched the property thoroughly. No footprints. No tire tracks beyond the main drive. He asked if I had enemies. At 74, you don't collect many. He suggested installing cameras. I did. 4 of them. 1 facing the driveway. 1 the windmill. 1 the back fence. 1 the porch. For 2 nights, nothing. On the 3rd, the windmill camera activated at 1:32 a.m. I opened the feed. A figure stood at the base of the windmill, looking directly at the camera. Too far for detail, but close enough to see posture. Still, unmoving. I watched for nearly a minute. He didn't wave, didn't approach, just stood there. Then he slowly lifted 1 arm. Not to signal, not to threaten, just raised it slightly, as if acknowledging that I was watching. My throat went dry. After several seconds, he lowered his arm and stepped back behind the windmill. The feed remained active. No one emerged. The next morning, I drove out there at first light. No footprints. No sign anyone had stood there. But at the base of the windmill, I found something placed carefully on the ground. A photograph. Old. Faded. It was a picture of my ranch house. Taken years ago. Before I'd replaced the roof. Before my wife passed. I know because she was standing on the porch in the photo. I was beside her. The angle of the picture was from the north field, near the windmill, which means someone had been on my property long before the stolen truck appeared. Long before the knocking. On the back of the photograph, written in black ink. You never notice what's been there. I didn't tell the deputy about the message. I showed him the photo, said I'd found it in a drawer and must have dropped it. I don't know why I lied. Maybe because saying the truth out loud would make it more real. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room with the shotgun across my lap. Around 2 a.m. The porch camera activated. I opened the feed. The porch was empty, but the rocking chair was moving, slowly, back and forth. No wind. The chair hasn't rocked on its own since my wife used to sit there. It continued for nearly 30 seconds, then stopped. At 2:14 a.m. The back fence camera activated. A figure was walking along the fence line, on my property, parallel to the house, not approaching, not retreating, just pacing, back and forth, as if measuring. The image flickered once. When it stabilized, the fence line was empty. I grabbed the shotgun and stepped outside. The night air was still, heavy. I walked halfway toward the fence, and that's when I heard it. A whisper. Close. Not from the field. From behind me. Daniel. I spun around. No one there. The porch empty. The yard still. But I know what I heard. No wind carries your name in that tone. I went back inside and locked the door. The next morning, the cameras showed something that unsettled me more than the whisper. At 3:02 a.m. While I was inside, the driveway camera recorded a vehicle pulling up slowly. Headlights off. It stopped near the gate. The driver's door opened, but no one stepped out. The door remained open for nearly a minute, then closed. The vehicle reversed and drove away. When I enhanced the footage, I noticed something else. There had been someone standing at the gate before the vehicle arrived. Already there, waiting, as if signaling it in. I haven't seen the truck since. But sometimes, when I look toward the windmill at dusk, I feel certain someone is standing there. Not every day, just often enough. And last week, I found the metal rod again. This time placed against my bedroom window. No scrape marks, no footprints, just leaning there, like a reminder. The sheriff thinks someone may be trying to scare me off the land. Developers have been buying ranches in this county lately. But no one has approached me with an offer. No letters, no calls, just presence. Quiet, persistent. The worst part isn't the knocking, or the whisper. It's the pacing along the fence. As if someone is mapping my routines, learning the property. And what keeps me awake most nights is a simple thought. The stolen truck wasn't abandoned. It was staged, and whoever parked it there didn't need it to stay. They needed me to see it, to know I wasn't alone. Out here, isolation used to mean safety. Now it feels like exposure. There are no neighbors to witness, no streetlights, no traffic, just open land. And somewhere beyond the fence line, beyond the windmill, beyond the heat waves on the horizon, someone who has been here longer than I realized, and isn't in a hurry to leave.